the stiff cardboard, she pulled back the flaps to find copies of a Du Maurier novel, My Cousin Rachel, which she had been expecting. Nodding in satisfaction, she closed it again and wandered over to a nearly empty shelf where she had stacked several new copies of Jane Eyre. She took the one from the top of the pile and tucked it under her arm, wondering who would read it with her. All around the world, she knew, were kindred spirits who reached for the same book on the same evening for comfort or affirmation, souls who found themselves in the pages of a book. But there were other readers, too, readers who didn't yet know who they were and how much a particular novel would mean to them. Alice felt it was her job to find them and give them a book. She bolted the shop door, took her pocketbook from the desk, and turned off the lights before making her way upstairs. It had only been a few weeks since she had moved into the building, but already she knew the familiar creak of every stair. The flat above was simply furnished. A bed against the far wall, a wardrobe, a table, and chair. She hadn't a television or even a sofa, but there was an old chaise with cushions one could sink into, and a trunk she had found at a second-hand shop that functioned as a perch for a teacup. In the second room, there was a makeshift kitchen, where she plugged in the electric kettle and set out a cup and saucer, as she did at the end of most days. Alice had never lived in Cambridge before. In fact, she had never even been to Massachusetts. After Jack, she had taken a map and traced her way as far from Chicago as she could get, loading her few possessions into suitcases and boarding the train to Boston. It was the most frightening, exciting thing she had ever done. It had taken her 3 weeks to find an empty shop, and then another 2 as she cleaned it up sufficiently to house the books she had selected and ordered from publishers and used bookstores around the city. After pulling a dressing gown from the wardrobe, she slipped it on over her dress as the kettle whistled. She brewed a cup of tea and took it to the chaise, where she sat down with her book. It lay unopened on her lap as she contemplated the silence. It was good to have a space to oneself where one could think and dream and plan. And there was much to plan, for it was to be a busy year if things turned out as she hoped. Taking a sip of her tea, she leaned back into the cushions, lifted her new copy of Jane Eyre, and held it to her breast. It was hard to imagine it had been published in 1847, as fresh as it felt to her each time she read it. She understood the loneliness Jane must have felt as a child, and even more the struggle to find her way in life. Bronte's heroines, like so many women before and after, were often dependent upon the humor and indulgences of men. Alice's sister lived in a 20-room mansion in Chicago, but at what expense? To have such a home meant to be as dependent as a child, and that was one thing Alice would never be again. She opened the book to the first page, content in every way with her situation, and began to read. The following day was Friday, a good day for a bookseller in Boston. In fact, it was a good day for booksellers everywhere. Readers came in with wages in their pockets and the desire to have a book companion for the weekend. She sold 2 copies of Catcher, a Hemingway, a Nancy Mitford that had only been in the shop for a few hours, and 4 used books she had picked up at a bookstall a week earlier for a quarter apiece. Around 3 o'clock, a young woman walked into the shop, and Alice glanced up from her seat behind the oak desk, where she was shuffling papers, writing down accounts. She nodded in greeting, loath to disturb anyone browsing through a bookshelf, though the girl didn't respond. She was likely one of the college girls around town. They were near Radcliffe, after all. The girl wore a plain dress with sensible shoes and a pair of dark tortoise-shell glasses. Alice tried to turn her attention back to the accounts, but she was interested in which shelves the girl explored. For a moment, she thought of handing her a copy of Jane Eyre, and then stopped herself. This was not a kindred spirit, she could tell. This was a girl who wanted A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, or another popular book of its ilk. Not that she disparaged readers of any sort, but she was looking for someone different. Eventually, the girl turned away from the shelves and brought a book up to the desk.